In a small, run-down neighborhood on the outskirts of a bustling city, life often felt like a constant struggle. The streets were narrow and filled with potholes, where only the most basic services existed, and the buildings were a patchwork of old bricks, worn-out paint, and layers of hardship. Here, in a modest home with peeling walls and the faint hum of passing traffic, lived a young girl named Nia. She was no stranger to adversity. In fact, it was practically woven into the fabric of her life. Nia was a bright-eyed girl with a heart full of dreams, yet each dream felt as far away as the gleaming skyscrapers she could see in the distance. These buildings were symbols of the wealth she had only heard about, a different world that seemed almost unreal. Every day, she would watch the city lights flicker from her window, imagining the lives of people who lived in luxury, who didn't know the pangs of hunger, or the weight of worry her mother carried daily. Nia had grown up hearing her mother's stories of perseverance and survival, stories that shaped her understanding of what it meant to be resilient. But more than anything, these tales also filled her with a yearning to someday change her circumstances. Despite her family's struggles, Nia found ways to make life a bit more bearable. She was resourceful, often helping her mother find odd jobs around the neighborhood, like washing dishes at the local diner or carrying groceries for the elderly residents in their building. It wasn't much, but each small act contributed to keeping their household afloat. Her mother worked tirelessly, juggling 2 jobs, but it still felt like they were only one unexpected expense away from crisis. Yet, in Nia's heart, there was a spark that hardship couldn't dim. She was determined to find a path to a brighter future, even if the odds seemed stacked against her. In her free moments, Nia would escape into books, borrowed from a makeshift library her school had assembled. These books opened her mind to other possibilities, other worlds where people like her could rise above their circumstances, where kindness and bravery made all the difference. They ignited her imagination and taught her to dream beyond the narrow limits of her reality. She would read stories of heroes who stood up for what was right, who helped others even when the cost was high, and she felt a quiet connection to them. For Nia, the notion of helping others felt natural, like something deeply ingrained in her soul, but outside of her dreams and books, Nia knew that life in her neighborhood was harsh. Crime was common, and people often turned a blind eye to the troubles around them, focusing instead on surviving each day. Safety was a luxury few could afford. Her mother constantly worried about Nia being out late, fearing that the streets would eventually change her, hardening her innocence and kindness. But Nia held on to her spirit, to the spark inside her, even as she navigated a world that sometimes seemed designed to extinguish it. School, Nia's teachers often remarked on her intelligence and dedication, praising her natural curiosity and eagerness to learn. Though resources were scarce, Nia found joy in learning, particularly in subjects that allowed her to see beyond her immediate surroundings. History was her favorite. She loved reading about courageous figures who changed the world against all odds. She saw herself in them, or at least aspired to. Her teachers noticed, too, how she would often stay after class, asking questions about the world and how things worked, hungry for any piece of knowledge that might one day be her ticket out of poverty. They encouraged her as best as they could, though they knew the challenges she faced. The neighborhood where Nia lived was a world apart from the wealthy enclaves that existed just miles away, yet those places might as well have been in a different universe. In one of those grand, gated communities lived a man named Jonathan King. He was a wealthy businessman, known in the city for his successful ventures and his luxurious lifestyle. His mansion sat on a sprawling estate, with manicured lawns, grand fountains, and high walls that seemed designed to keep the rest of the world at bay. Mr. King had a young son, Leo, who was about the same age as Nia, though the two of them lived lives as different as night and day. Where Nia's life was defined by struggle and resilience, Leo's was marked by privilege and ease. He had never known the kind of hardships Nia faced. To him, the world was a place of wonder, filled with endless possibilities and opportunities, and he moved through life with the quiet assurance of someone who had never had to question where his next meal would come from or whether he would be safe. Leo was a lively boy, with a curiosity that rivaled Nia's, but his perspective on the world was unburdened, shaped by the freedom and security his father's wealth afforded him. Jonathan King, though he loved his son dearly, was a man of ambition and focus, often preoccupied with the demands of his career. He believed that hard work and success were the cornerstones of a good life, and he provided everything Leo could ever need or want, yet he was often too busy to spend much time with him. Leo's days were filled with tutors, activities, and the care of nannies and house staff, people who saw to his every need. It was a life designed to shield him from the realities of the outside world, a world Jonathan King saw as too unpredictable and chaotic to be part of his son's upbringing. But fate, as it often does, had a plan that neither Nia nor Leo nor anyone else could foresee. Though their lives were separated by an invisible barrier, a series of events would soon bring them together in the most unexpected of ways. And while Nia had no way of knowing it, her life, and the lives of those around her, would be changed forever. The story of a young girl who had been forged in the fires of hardship would intersect with the life of a boy who had known only comfort, and in that moment, everything would shift. As Nia went about her days, carrying out her small acts of kindness and courage, she had no inkling of the extraordinary journey that lay ahead of her, nor of the test of character that would soon confront her. And Leo, ensconced in the safety of his father's mansion, was equally unaware that he would soon encounter a bravery and goodness he had never seen, embodied in a girl from a world far removed from his own. It was a warm summer day when the paths of Nia and Leo finally crossed. The day had started like any other for Nia, who had spent the morning running errands around her neighborhood and helping her mother prepare lunch. Meanwhile, Leo was at a nearby park with his nanny, a place his father had chosen specifically because it was situated in a quiet, upscale area, supposedly free of any potential dangers. But no place, however carefully chosen, is immune to the unexpected. As she often did in the afternoons, Nia had walked to a park a few blocks from her home. It was a public space where children from all walks of life played, though it was less tended to than the parks in wealthier areas. She liked to go there, not only to enjoy the fresh air but also to people watch. She often wondered about the lives of others, their worries and dreams, and found herself daydreaming about meeting someone her own age who could understand her and her aspirations. That day, however, the park was more crowded than usual. A festival was underway in the nearby neighborhood, drawing people from different parts of the city. Children were running around, and vendors shouted out their offerings, filling the air with noise and energy. Among the crowd was Leo, eager to explore beyond his usual routines, and his nanny struggling to keep him within sight. Leo was curious, wandering further and further from her as he followed the sounds and colors that intrigued him. Nia noticed Leo almost immediately, partly because he was dressed in clothes far nicer than any she'd seen on other children in the park, and partly because he seemed a little out of place, moving around with a sense of wonder and freedom that reminded her of a small bird exploring the world outside its cage for the first time. She observed him from a distance, smiling to herself at his innocent curiosity. In a matter of minutes, however, Nia's casual observation turned into concern. She saw Leo inching closer to the lake at the edge of the park, drawn by the glimmer of the water. Though it was shallow, it was still deep enough to pose a danger to a young child who didn't know how to swim. She looked around, hoping to see an adult nearby, but Leo's nanny had been momentarily distracted, trying to help another child who had fallen on the pavement. Suddenly, before anyone could react, Leo slipped on the muddy embankment and tumbled forward into the water. Nia's heart skipped a beat. She saw his small arms flailing, his face full of panic as he struggled to keep his head above water. No one else seemed to notice in the chaotic noise of the park. Instinct took over, and without a second thought, Nia sprinted toward the lake. She could feel the adrenaline rushing through her veins as she reached the water's edge, not stopping to consider the consequences or even to remove her shoes. She plunged into the water, her heart pounding as she fought against the weight of her soaked clothes, determined to reach him. Leo was panicking, his movements frantic and uncoordinated, making it hard for her to hold on to him. But she focused, drawing on every ounce of strength she had, and wrapped her arms around him, keeping his head above water as best as she could. For Nia, those moments felt like a lifetime. She could feel her muscles straining as she struggled to pull Leo back to the shore, the coldness of the water cutting through her thin clothing. Her mind was a blur, focused solely on keeping him safe, on getting him to solid ground. Every now and then, Leo would cry out, his voice filled with fear, and Nia would reassure him, whispering words of comfort as she pulled him along. She didn't know if he could hear her, but she spoke anyway, determined to be a calm presence in his chaos. Finally, they reached the edge of the lake, where Nia, breathless and trembling, managed to drag Leo onto the grass. She collapsed beside him, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. Leo was coughing and sputtering, but he was safe. She looked at him, relief flooding through her as she saw the color returning to his cheeks. She had done it, she had saved him. People were starting to gather around them now, drawn by the commotion. Some looked on with confusion, others with concern, but all eyes were on Nia and the drenched little boy beside her. Leo's nanny had rushed over, her face a mask of panic and shock as she realized what had happened. She knelt beside him, checking to see if he was all right, but Leo barely seemed to notice her. His wide, grateful eyes were fixed on Nia, as if she were some kind of guardian angel who had appeared out of nowhere to save him. In that moment, Nia felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. She was relieved to see Leo safe, but she was also aware that she had acted on pure impulse, without any regard for what might happen to her. The weight of the moment hit her as she saw the shocked faces around her. She felt a strange blend of pride and anxiety, a feeling she had never experienced before, but before she had time to process it, Leo reached out, his small hand gripping hers with a trust and gratitude that needed no words. For Nia, that simple gesture was more powerful than any thank you she could have received. It was a connection, however brief, between two worlds, two lives that couldn't have been more different. Leo's nanny began to thank Nia, her voice shaky as she realized how close they had come to disaster. But Nia barely heard her. She was still holding Leo's hand, the moment lingering like a fragile thread, connecting them across a gap as vast as the life circumstances that separated them. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew, somehow, that this moment would be with her forever. As she slowly got to her feet, exhausted but steady, she felt the curious eyes of the onlookers on her. She glanced around, feeling a mixture of self-consciousness and pride. The people here likely didn't know her story, her background, or the struggles she faced daily. But for this brief instant, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that she had done the right thing, that she had acted with courage when it was needed most. As she turned to leave, her clothes still dripping and her heart still racing, she didn't realize that this moment, this act of bravery, was the beginning of something far greater than she could imagine. In her mind, she was simply a girl who had helped another in need. But in the eyes of those who had witnessed it, and in the heart of a grateful boy who would never forget her, she was something more. After the rescue, word of Nia's bravery began to spread rapidly. Though she had tried to slip away from the scene quietly, a few people had asked her name, and soon enough, a neighborhood newspaper ran a story about the young hero who had saved a millionaire's son. Nia wasn't looking for recognition. In her mind, she'd simply done what anyone would have done. But for those who knew her and her family, the story was a testament to her kind and courageous heart, a quality often overlooked in the harsh realities of their lives. As for Leo, he couldn't stop talking about the girl who had saved him. The memory of her kindness and bravery stayed with him, and he spoke of her with a wonder and admiration that reached his father's ears. Jonathan King was deeply shaken when he learned what had happened. The thought of nearly losing his son made him reconsider many things in his life. He had always been so focused on work, on building his empire, that he had rarely paused to appreciate what truly mattered. Leo's narrow escape served as a reminder that all the wealth in the world couldn't protect what was most precious to him. Determined to meet the girl who had saved his son, Jonathan tracked down Nia and her family. When he arrived at their modest apartment, he was struck by the stark difference between their lives. The walls were plain, the furniture worn, yet the place had a warmth that his own luxurious mansion sometimes lacked. Nia's mother greeted him with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She knew Jonathan King's reputation. He was known for his wealth and influence in the city, but she had no idea what he could possibly want with her daughter. When Nia finally came into the room, she was both nervous and curious. She had never been face to face with a man like Jonathan, someone who held so much power and prestige. But she met his gaze without fear, her eyes reflecting the same quiet strength that had driven her to save Leo. Jonathan extended a hand to her, his voice softened by genuine gratitude. "You saved my son's life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Nia nodded, almost shyly. "I'm glad he's okay. I just did what I could." Jonathan looked around the small apartment and realized how much Nia had sacrificed to save Leo. Her clothes, still damp and stained from the lake, lay folded on a chair nearby. It was a small detail, but it brought into sharp focus how little she and her family had, and how willing she had been to risk it all without a second thought. Moved by her humility, Jonathan began to think about how he could repay her. A financial reward felt too impersonal, too small in the face of what she had done. He wanted to make a difference in her life, to create an opportunity for her that would allow her to pursue her dreams. He learned that Nia was a talented student with a hunger for knowledge, a young girl who had done her best despite her circumstances. She was someone who, given the chance, could break free from the cycle of poverty that had defined her life. A few days later, Jonathan returned, this time with an offer that took Nia and her mother completely by surprise. He had arranged a scholarship for Nia at one of the best private schools in the city, a place where she could receive an education that matched her potential. It was a chance to study in an environment that would challenge her, support her dreams, and give her the tools she needed to one day change her life. At first, Nia was hesitant. She felt a sense of loyalty to her community and worried about leaving behind the friends she had grown up with. But her mother encouraged her to seize the opportunity. This was her chance to create a different future, one where she wouldn't have to struggle as they had, where she could become someone who could perhaps even give back to the neighborhood she loved. After much thought, Nia accepted the scholarship. Her first day at the new school was a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The hallways were grand and intimidating, filled with students who had grown up with privileges she could barely imagine. Nia felt out of place at first, but she was determined to prove herself. She studied hard, often staying up late into the night to keep up with the demanding curriculum. Her teachers quickly noticed her diligence, and soon enough, they recognized her potential. Nia began to thrive, excelling in her classes and gaining the respect of her peers. Jonathan's son, Leo, had also started at the same school, and he and Nia occasionally crossed paths. Though they came from completely different worlds, the shared memory of that summer day had forged a bond between them. Leo never forgot the kindness she had shown him, and in his own way, he tried to support her, making her feel welcome and valued. Their friendship blossomed, and through Leo, Nia experienced a side of life she had never known. She visited his home on a few occasions, marveling at the sprawling mansion and the many luxuries it held. But rather than feeling envy, she felt inspired, recognizing that her path was taking her somewhere she had always dreamed of. As the years passed, Nia's life began to transform. She graduated from high school at the top of her class, earning a place at a prestigious university. She chose to study social work, inspired by her own journey and the people in her community who had struggled just like she had. She wanted to give back, to become a voice for those who were often overlooked and marginalized. Her experiences had given her both the compassion and the resilience needed to make a real difference. Meanwhile, Jonathan King kept a quiet watch over her progress. Though he remained a powerful businessman, his perspective on life had shifted. He became more involved in charitable work, contributing to programs that supported underprivileged youth. Leo, too, grew up with a sense of gratitude, always remembering the girl who had saved him and inspired his father to see the world in a new light. Nia's story became a beacon of hope for those in her neighborhood, a reminder that bravery and kindness could change the course of a life. She had come from humble beginnings, but through her courage and determination, and the compassion of those who recognized her worth, she had risen above her circumstances. And though her journey was far from over, she knew that every step she took was part of a greater purpose, a way to honor the girl she had been and the lives she had touched along the way.